Families workshop this evening. So we are recording this session. And so if you happen to be having a bad hair day, now is a good time to turn off your video. But we want to invite you to, I know Renee is going to put up the information around, yes, it's in the chat. If you are in need of, and I apologize because I'm actually saying these words in English, but if you're in need of interpretation or transcript, the link for that is in the chat. And we are very excited tonight to have a conversation about cortical visual impairment. What the heck is that? And what do we do about it? And so we're very excited to have Rachel Bennett with us today. Rachel is the Assistant Director of the CVI Center at Perkins, where she leads the CVINow.org organization of parent advocacy and support. As a parent of Henry, who has CVI and other disabilities, she knows the duality that comes with being a disability parent, feeling overwhelming love for said child, and at the same time, grief and pain. And so in 2020, Rachel completed UMass Boston CVI certificate program. And before joining Perkins, Rachel was a middle school special educator and a secondary instructional specialist in Maryland. So we want to welcome Rachel with us this evening, who's going to give us a presentation on CVI. There will be opportunity at the end of presentation for questions. We did take the questions that people sent ahead of time so that Rachel would have the opportunity to address many of them in her presentation. So if you do have questions, if you could please put them in the chat and raise your hand once she's finished, and then I will do my best to get to as many questions as we possibly can this evening. As always, if we're not able to get to all of your questions, we will take them down and we will address them afterwards and include them with the recording on our website. So all is not lost if we can't get to it today. All right. So again, if you need interpretation or translation, the link for that is in the chat. And without further ado, because I know Rachel has lots to talk about, Rachel, we'll turn it over to you. And thank you again for joining us this evening.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Beth. Thank you to everybody at the Federation. It's really wonderful to be here. And I appreciate all of you who are joining me today. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get rocking and rolling. Okay, looks good. Okay, so we're going to talk about CVI. CVI is the leading cause of childhood blindness, and I have a child with CVI. This isn't him. His name is Henry. He's 10 years old. He's in 4th grade. He has CVI and ocular visual impairments that include nystagmus and optic nerve hypoplasia and others. He has other learning complexities and needs. Yeah, he's, all the things like many of you know. So I live with it with you. And again, just really wonderful and grateful to be here and talk to all of us. I do want to give a shout out to Rebecca Davis, who's a fellow CVI parent who's been quite a strong CVI parent advocate in the field for a long time. So I'm glad you're with us and for all you do. So we're going to talk about what CVI is. We're going to talk about current research, the CVI visual behaviors. We're going to talk about some design tools for access. So what are some examples of what access could look like throughout the school day, and some takeaways from the CVI Now IoT guide. So CVI, and this is according to current research, educators, families, individuals with CVI. I do want to take a moment to note that, CVI Now and the CVI Center is all about centering current research and voices of CVI as a way to continue to understand all that's coming out about CVI. It's an evolving field. So cortical/cerebral visual impairment is a brain-based visual impairment caused by damage to the visual pathways or visual processing areas of the brain. And we'll talk about the brain in a little bit. CVI is the leading cause of blindness in children. Yes, it's the leading cause, but the medical and educational communities still have some catch-up work to do. And so that's why many families out there, and I saw some questions come in saying, my kid has CVI, but nobody knows what to do. And that's why the CVI Center is here at Perkins to really start confronting the challenge of CVI and making sure that no matter how CVI manifests and no matter their zip code, every child gets access to life-changing services. People with CVI struggle with visual attention and visual recognition. So visual attention is being able to look at something, that eye to object fixation, and recognition is to know what you're looking at, to interpret it and understand it. And this results in a lack of access to and understanding of the world around them. And CVI is lifelong. It's in the brain, and so there's expectation that things can change and evolve and possibly improve, but CVI is lifelong. And all manifestations of CVI are a big deal for the person. And this is really my underlying argument in my work with CVI now. It's a big deal no matter how it manifests, and we have to treat it that way. It's not up to sighted people to make assumptions and perhaps minimize the extent to which a person with CVI is impacted. And so with CVI, every individual person's experience is different. There are some commonalities, but some see the world as a swirling mass of color and light and movement that can be incomprehensible or overwhelming. For example, just a simulation in the picture to the right. Some can focus at times, but still may struggle to understand what they see. Many shut out the world altogether and avoid looking at objects and people because it's so difficult to make sense of their surroundings. Others just might appear to have learning difficulties or become anxious in new environments. Some use a white cane, like my son, to navigate safely in their environment and communities. And many experience what's called CVI meltdowns due to fatigue brought on by too many competing sensory inputs. And so what are people with CVI saying? The past few years, a lot of adults with CVI have really come out and shared their experiences, and we're hearing from teenagers with CVI and of course parents, and we really want to heighten and make sure that we're centering their experience because we want to come to CVI with a disability rights lens. And so people, they're saying people with CVI are the experts of their own brains. Vision use is not passive, it's hard work. So many of us go about our day just unaware and unconscious of how we use our vision. For many with CVI, it's hard work, right? It's hard work to be able to use their vision in a functional, meaningful way. But also vision is unreliable. You know, for some, their vision goes out moments in the day. For others, it's huge swaths, and it's really dependent. Vision can be affected by both internal, so how you're feeling inside, if you're hungry, if you're tired, if you're sick, or external, what's going around your environment. And that can really interrupt vision use. There are many ways to access information with CVI. It's not just about vision. Compensatory skills don't take away from vision use. Some with CVI use vision, some use their compensatory skills, and many use both. It's about knowing the whole child in front of you. And self-advocacy and self-acceptance are critical. Here's Nye D'Amato. They're an adult with CVI who has an incredible blog called The CVI Perspective, and I highly recommend you go and read it. It was really kind of a gut punch to me in a lot of ways as a parent, really understanding how to see what access looks like for my child, and to really look at our relationship and what he needs through disability rights lens. He's not 4 anymore, and so what does access look like for him and what does he need? So she says vision alone never came into focus by itself. It had to be buttressed by something non-visual. The lesson in CVI isn't about seeing or not seeing. It's about a much deeper principle, autonomy and choice, right? Giving choice of when they can use their vision and when they need that visual break. What CVI folks need are options and their freedom to choose. What we need is respect as the experts of our own brain. And so there's an adult with CVI named Dagbort. She's an adult in Iceland. She's actually starting to be an opera singer. And she says when she goes into a new place, this sums up how I see when I go into a new place. Unrecognizable, mismatched jigsaw. And we'll see some more examples again. But imagine going through the world and every time you go into a new place, it looks like this, right? CVI is a big deal. And so on CVI now, there's a whole What is CVI page that includes videos and explanations about CVI. And also on the main Perkins website, we have a really cool interactive infographic about CVI and the visual behaviors. That's something that's probably really good to share with your school team.
Rachel?
Yeah.
If you could please just slow down a little bit.
Good. I know. I get excited. I talk too fast. Thank you so much.
I understand how passion about something can have you talking.
No, and it's
really
something
fast.
I need to work on with my child who has a central auditory processing disorder as well. So I'm like, I need to be Fred Rogers right now.
You can
Okay,
do it.
here we go.
You can do it.
All right. So there's been a lot of new research about the prevalence of CVI, and it's really exciting. And that's why it's so important as parents, especially, to follow the current research because it's a tool for advocacy. And so we're learning, mainly from the UK, that 1 in 30 kids have some type of CVI-related visual difficulty. So the CVI project in the UK found that At least 3% of children in mainstream schools, equating to one child in every classroom, had CVI-related visual difficulties. And they looked at over 2,000 children. This was just in a mainstream classroom. They weren't looking at special schools or schools for the visually impaired. So that's a big deal. CVI is common in neurodevelopmental conditions, prematurity. 60% of those with CP also have CVI. HIE, hydrocephalus, meningitis, that's common in autism. Down syndrome, 38%. A research study just came out recently about that. A wide range of genetic syndromes: Williams, Rett, CDKL5, trisomy 21, West, Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, and a whole host of genetic variants that are associated with CVI. My son Henry has an extremely rare genetic variant. There's probably only 30 other people that have that gene affected, but maybe not the same way as my son. So I know, as a rare kid, I'm living in uncharted territory. So I'm sure we're going to get more information about all the variants that contribute to CVI. Children receiving special education services are 28 times more likely to encounter vision problems than typically developed children. And what we can really extrapolate from that is when we go into school systems, if they look at children with multiple disabilities, they better be sure that many of them are going to have CVI, and they should really start being aware of that. And then in the UK, 50% of children with visual impairments have CVI, 50%. Now they have a nationalized healthcare system, so they have a lot better data than we do, but we can really extrapolate this data to start talking about our case here in the US. And so a lot of research talks about the visual system in the brain. And on CVI now, there's a whole 5-part series about this complex and highly connected system. So there's a whole article about how the eyes work and our ocular motor system and the early visual pathway and higher order pathways. And then the importance of neuroplasticity, which is about, building connections in the brain and learn new things and, live wiring the brain. And that's really important with children with CVI. With anybody with a brain-based condition, you can build those connections with access to learning. And so let's just talk briefly about how vision is built in the brain. And so the eye takes in that information, right? So say we have this apple. It's going to land on the back of the retina, and the retina actually has brain cells in it. And it's going to take that information, those electrical impulses, through the optic nerve and into the thalamus, which is really a sensory gateway region in the brain. And in the thalamus, there's something called the lateral genetic nucleus, the LGM. And there they sift through the information and send it through the optic radiations and back into the visual cortex, where we start processing our visual information. And so what it looks like in the back here, this is in our occipital lobe in the back of our brains. And so here is responsible for that very early processing, where they start seeing objects, edges and contours, orientation, motion, depth perception, color, shape, lightness, and motion. And so this whole early pathway system, if anything is interrupted there, most likely there's going to be issues with acuity, with contrast sensitivity, with visual field loss, depth perception. And then we get to the higher order visually processing system, which is the meat and potatoes of CVI. And so we have what's called the dorsal stream, which runs from the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, and the frontal lobe. And this helps us find items in space, visual motor skills, spatial orientation, visual attention, just every day in the world, how to ignore competing distractors and focus in on something. And then we have something called the ventral stream. It goes from the occipital lobe to the temporal lobe, and it allows for that fine detail vision to recognize things and objects and people and faces. And now the dorsal and ventral streams are highly interconnected, and recent research is really showing this. Originally, we thought, maybe the dorsal stream comes on first and the ventral. That's not how it works. The reason that they work and our visual system work is because the ventral stream and the dorsal stream work with each other. They can never act alone. And it's these interconnectivity systems that might be compromised with CVI. And so Dr. Latvia Marabet, who's a leading CVI researcher who's here in the Boston area, he says there are many tributaries that exist between the two. We need both streams to work together and in an integrated way in order to fully leverage our visual system. And both are typically impacted with CVI. How's my pace? Is it okay? Is it better? Okay, just keep.
It was better. You were starting to speed up though, so you were catching yourself. That's good. Now,
thank you, Beth. Yeah. Just keep me honest. And so what happens when we have atypical dorsal and ventral streams? So when there's damage to the dorsal stream, we're going to have difficulty with spatial perception, perception of movement, visually guided reach of upper and lower limbs, accurately and safely walking around obstacles, and distinguishing between multiple objects when presented in clutter. If there's damage to the ventral stream, we might have difficulty with contrast sensitivity, depth perception, identifying and interpreting objects and faces, and route finding. And so I want to go to a video from Dr. Latvi Marabet's research that shows these connections and connectivity. And so on the left here in the control, we have a control brain. And then on the right, we have CVI. And so I want to just go back here. If you're just looking at the whole brain here, not much difference, right? But when you look at the visual pathways, you see a profound difference, right? CVI is a big deal. And right, this is the dorsal stream up here, ventral stream. Look at how much connectivity is between these two streams and then CVI brain. Again, this is just one brain next to the other. But I also want to note that there's still a lot of other connections in the CVI brain. And so how do we leverage them with access to learning, right? There's people with CVI have a strategy for everything. All right, let me get out of here and get back into here. And so Dr. Latvi Marabet says, you know, the neural network of the CVI brain is fundamentally different, right? I feel like CVI is the intersection between blindness and neurodiversity. And so let's talk about the CVI visual behaviors. And this is really, these are based on current research in the field, synthesizing information from leading theorists. And so these are the visual behaviors that Perkins uses, and they're part of the assessment areas for the new Perkins CVI protocol, which is currently in development. I'll talk about that a little later. So we talked about visual attention, being able to look, visual recognition to know what you're looking at. Then there's the impact of clutter and crowding. Many people with CVI are not able to see things or find something in the presence of visual clutter. So it could be 2 things at once. It could be 3, 4 things at once. They can't recognize people if they're in a crowd. Clutter really shuts down vision. Visual field abilities. Many with CVI have different types of visual field loss. For some, if there's too much clutter or if there's too much sensory information, their visual field is going to constrict. And that's what we've been hearing from some adults with CVI. Color is a relative strength for people with CVI. Many use color coding skills to track an unrecognizable visual world. For example, they open up, you know, a cluttered refrigerator and they're looking for a red bottle because they want the ketchup, right? They're matching that color because they can't recognize the details. Form accessibility has to do with visual learning media. So what's most accessible? Is it real 3D objects? If you go into 2D form, like pictures, what type of pictures? They have to be real photographs. A lot of people with CVI can't see abstract black and white. And when it comes to print, is print accessible? Is it too fatiguing? What kind of print? So that's all those questions there. Visual guidance of upper and lower limbs have to do with those visual motor skills, that eye and hand coordination, that eye and foot and leg coordination. Access to people, many people with CVI have face blindness, so they're not able to recognize faces, and they recognize people with other attributes around them, hair, mainly their voice. My son recognizes me with my voice. If he walks in the room, he'll most likely miss me. And before he was diagnosed with CVI, he wasn't diagnosed until he was 5. It was missed, and I would walk in to pick him up at daycare, and he didn't have the same reaction that other kids had when their kids walked from across the room. And, you know, I just always wondered why. And so it's important that I knew why. Light is interesting. Light can be a strength for some with CVI. It helps that, like the backlighting of the iPad or task lighting can draw attention, but a light in the environment can also be disoriented and distracting. Response interval has to do with the amount of time it takes, that wait time when you present something, a visual stimuli, how much time will it take for them to attend to it, but then also how much time will it take for them to recognize it. And a lot of things can increase this wait time, fatigue, if there's other competing sensory stimuli. Motion is really interesting. Motion can also be a relative strength, just that slow methodic motion, it helps with attention, but it's also a big difficulty. Many with CVI have difficulty recognizing or being able to process fast motion. So moving cars, swings, people walking by, you know, all the gestures that we use, that's motion. We live our lives in motion, even just turning from left to right, that's motion. And that's complicated for many with CVI. Sensory integration has to do with being able to use vision when there's noise. when it's a busy environment. A lot of people with CVI are not able to look and listen at the same time. Visual curiosity has to do with that incidental learning piece. You know, those with typical vision, the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we learn by observation. And many with CVI don't have access to that incidental learning. And so not have access to that distance vision to what's going on in the environment around them. And so that means a lot of our kids need that direct and explicit instruction and concepts and skills that are learned through incidental learning. And then, you know, appearance of eyes and movement, it's really important to understand how these eyes are working in conjunction with, if anything else is going on. Many with CVI also have ocular issues. So it becomes a complicated visual profile. And then underlining all of this is how our kids use their compensatory skills to access their world. So I want to just do just two questions, two little simulations. You see this picture here, and I want you to name a word that rhymes with what's in this picture. Just to kind of get a sense of what it's like if you're not able to recognize something. Some of you might recognize this. I forget what it is, honestly. I should have remembered that. Anything coming through, Beth?
Nothing yet. I think we're all a little perplexed as to what it is.
What is it?
Yeah.
Right, so that's hard. So if you ask a kid with CVI, you know, look at this picture and let me know, you know, what things, well, if you ask them this question and they don't do it, you know, they don't realize it's not visually accessible. They may realize something else is going on, and that's not okay, because, you know, this task requires us to demonstrate a cognitive skill based on an image we couldn't interpret. And that's really, really not a good thing when it comes to our kids and access and learning. And what about this one? Can anybody name a thing in this photo? Oops, name one thing in this photo. I don't know what this photo is, but I can't.
I see jewelry.
You think it's jewelry? Are you sure about that?
Not anymore.
No, yeah, maybe jewelry. It's not quite clear. Like you can kind of like, that looks like something that I know.
I think I see a teddy bear.
Is this thing?
Yeah, that looks like a bear.
I think I see it.
And it looks like there's some sort of wreath in the background.
Yeah. Not quite sure. Not totally can rely on what you're seeing.
So I see things in the chat: a fish and a fist, a turkey, candy, jewelry display.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. But it's not crystal clear, right? Where a lot of us are using that memory, context, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough when you go and when you walk around the world and you're not able to recognize anything. And so when on CVI now, we have a whole library that teach of learning around the CVI visual behaviors. There's a whole overview video. There's brief blurbs about each behavior. And then if you click on the links on each blurb, there's a mini lesson video and then a whole article about the behavior and about current research and questions that you can use when you observe your kid. So there's a lot to learn here. And so I want to go through some of these behaviors and get some quotes from people with CVI about what it's like. And so clutter, like I said, is a big one. And this is Dr. Nicola McDowell, an adult with CVI in New Zealand, who is now a researcher and creating her own screening tool as well, which is exciting. This clutter of the classroom, combined with the overload of other sensory information, such as the constant noise, movement, and smells of a classroom full of students, meant that I spent the whole day feeling anxious and on edge. Being in these cluttered environments was also exhausting, and I soon learned that the only way I was going to survive each day was if I allowed myself some quiet time during break times. These solitary timeouts ended up becoming one of my most important strategies for dealing with the anxiety, confusion, and fatigue my visual issues created every day. So form accessibility. Here's Grace, an elementary school student with CVI. She says, when I read, it feels like my eyes are being pulled out from their centers. I have a hard time reading long passages like when we have the end of grade tests because my eyes get tired after about 2 paragraphs. This does not stop me from reading lots of audiobooks. And we're going to see Grace later when I talk about dual media for reading and learning.
What is it? What is it?
Visual guidance of upper limbs. This is CVI parent says, my son has a really difficult time using visual motor skills. He'll reach past something, around it, or stop short of it. He often uses tactile skills when searching for something. He rarely looks and reaches at the same time, and that's okay. He has strategies that work for him. Visual guidance of lower limbs. Here's Henry in the train. We ride the train every weekend. That's a whole nother story. Navigating steps, sidewalks, and this is Dagbort, and that adult from CVI from Iceland. Navigating steps, sidewalks, pattern surfaces, and pattern carpets is almost impossible for me if I don't use a cane. Pattern carpets are a nightmare, a nightmare. Impact of light. This is Nye D'Amato, an adult with CVI. If there was a bright lamp in a dim room, or if the TV was on with the lights off, that's what would grab my visual attention. I would find myself staring at it, even if it hurt my eyes. Motion. This is Mara, CVI parent. My son has tremendous amount of difficulty being outdoors. He had an outdoor school concert. He plays the piano. He was in severe panic mode as there were birds flying everywhere and lots of noise and people around did not help. Birds in particular frighten him with their sudden and unpredictable movements. And I see this with my son too. Sometimes it looks like he's walking through a haunted house when he's outside. Just so many things just suddenly appear that he wasn't able to process the movement of. Sensory integration. This is a huge one. Of all the articles that I wrote for the CVI visual behaviors, I had the most quotes from people with CVI about the difficulty of sensory integration. When a task required, this is from Nye again, when a task required my vision, it stole all cognitive resources for other senses. In other words, I could either see and do nothing else, or I could do other things and not see. Doing both at the same time was not an option. Vision was an app or a web page that would use all the RAM on the computer or a smartphone.
Oh.
It's really tough to use vision. And so I do want to go through a little simulation, but kind of how all of these CVI behaviors might play out in the classroom. And so we just have a sample picture here of a small group in a classroom. And so if you say like, oh, they don't have access to people, well, a lot of other stuff is going on as well. And we have to really understand with the CVI, all of these visual behaviors are connected and at play all the time. So we have the teacher here and we have 4 students, and this is our student right here looking in. And so if there's visual field loss, they're going to be missing that peer to the right. If they have difficulty recognizing faces, right, then they might only be able to recognize from what their color's wearing. This teacher's wearing a great color. And they might not be able to interpret facial expressions. For motion, they might miss the gestures, or such as a point to relevant materials or a high five, because they can't process that motion. And so we see the picture lots of things start to get fuzzy. This is just a simulation. And then difficulty with recognizing people at a distance, but it depends on this person with CVI. They maybe can recognize things maybe beyond 6 feet, but for some, it's maybe not beyond 18 inches. They rely on color of their friend's shirt and that teacher's shirt to locate them. They might start over-attending to environmental light to avoid visual commotion. And so now the picture is becoming a little bit distorted. They might start looking away while being spoken to, or putting their head down because of all the noise. And then all the crowding and the clutter and the fatigue just makes vision really, really hard. And the picture becomes unrecognizable.
Oh.
Another example with clutter, for example, in the home. This isn't my home, but the things get cluttered. I have a younger daughter too, and she leaves stuff everywhere. She doesn't care about my son's CVI. And so, how does clutter impact? And so maybe my son is trying to find this yellow cup with this blue cup with a yellow lid. And so what might that be like for him? So this is clutter. This is a lot of visual information at once to take in. And so the brain is overloaded. And so we hear from adults with CVI that their vision becomes fuzzy, or their vision is like a fun house and distorted. And so I want to point out, Dr. Lafayette talks about with increased visual load, and he's done studies on this, with increased visual load, individuals with CVI have to grind it out, which eventually leads to frustration, which we've heard about from our voices of CVI, and anxiety. This perpetuates throughout the day, causing this vicious cycle of fatigue and stress. And so many of us with a typical visual abilities are able to do what's called parallel processing, just take in multiple pieces of information at once, just like that, the gestalt of the scene. For people with CVI, they use something called serial processing, which is scrutinizing one piece of information at a time when there's more sensory information to take in. It is a less efficient form of visual search. And so if Henry's trying to find that blue cup amongst that clutter, what does that serial processing might look like? And again, this is just an abstract simulation. And so he might see the edge of that iPad on the table. And at this point, his visual field might be constricted because there's too much clutter to take in. He might then go and find that yellow Pop-It toy. He might see that red bowl of popcorn. Then he might find his snack plate, and then he might see the edge of his cup, and then he finds it. And so every time trying to find something, no wonder he relies a lot on his tactile skills, right? It's fatiguing, it's hard. And it's important to really observe kids and see what strategies they use to be able to access the world in the most efficient and accessible way. And so we have a whole series on visual fatigue on CVI now, around the science behind it, the signs of visual fatigue, and some just big ideas to help reduce that visual fatigue throughout the day. And this is a big thing that school teams need to know. What does fatigue look like in a child with CVI, and how do you reduce it, and how do you build in those breaks? And so some quotes about just what it's like, you know, to have fatigue and how that affects vision. We've heard this from Nye. When you have CVI, seeing is not passive. Anything sight related is active work. It's grueling work. It's tons of effort, very little payoff. It's a big deal. CVI is a big deal. Dagwart says, when I'm rested and happy, I can see clearly except for my visual field loss. My acuity is fine. But when I have visual fatigue, it's like looking through a straw. I have an extremely limited visual field. It gets all fuzzy. I'm also not able to recognize what I was just looking at. Touch helps me recognize it. I get almost blind when I'm tired. CVI is a big deal. Tina is an adult with CVI. She's attending the Mass College of Art. She says heat waves affect my CVI a lot, and I have been experiencing a lot of zero vision days. This was during the summer when we had the string of hot days, or a day when my brain doesn't want to see. I'm just walking around and getting no visual feedback from my brain. So a hot day, being tired, can make vision useless. CVI is a big deal. And then when behavior is communication, right? So many of our kids can't tell us when they're fatigued, can't tell us what their vision is like. My son can't tell me what his vision is like. I can just see his behavior. And so we might see resting head and hands, or looking away, or pushing all items out of view, or asking for a snack, or running away, or going to the corner of the room, or just closing their eyes, putting their head down, fidgeting their toy, or always needs hugs. My son always asks for hugs. Just banging items on the table so they move, you know, other outward behaviors. And it's really important for us to understand what is that behavior telling us? And most likely something's not going right. Their vision's not, they're tired. Things aren't what they need to be. And just lastly, we have a article on CVI now, just about CVI evolving, still learning so much. And so we're learning about difficulty with visual spatial processing and visualization, that mind's eye. Many with CVI aren't able to visualize. And CVI and chronic migraines, which my son experiences, and you know what happens with temperature. And so what are some design tools then, right? When we think about creating access for our kids, what do we need to think about? So let's do a few more other simulations, just talk about what access is. Does anybody know what this is? If you've seen this before, don't say it. Does anybody know? Take a look. I would love to hear some guesses.
It's like ice.
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 You ready for some snow?
Someone is saying a bird in the chat.
Ooh, interesting.
I think it's a bird too.
I'm wondering if it's concrete with some snow or something on it.
Oh,
Oh, it could be a grate with a mitten in the upper right-hand corner of it.
Okay. And Christy says she knows, but she won't say.
oh, Christy, don't. Thank you. All right. Well, let me do a few design tools to give you a little more access. All right. So now I oriented it and removed the background. What do you think it is now?
Cow.
Ow.
And also added some color so you can it can pop out. Does that help?
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
Oh,
Okay.
what is
We
it?
all need design tools for access, right? We all need it. Let's try something else. Okay.
Rachel, can you slow down just a bit, please?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it so much. So we're going to follow, I want you to follow line F from start to finish. Hello, clutter. I'm not going to make you do it. Let's add some color and see if it helps. Does it help? Can we see line F?
Yeah,
See how color makes something pop out of clutter. And this is all from Matt, who is a leader in the field and a TVI down in Connecticut. Right? Again, we all need access. Let's read this. Right, my thoughts exactly. This is again from Matt. It's a text from a textbook page. Right? We could try to do this. We could try to read word by word, but after the first line, it's going to be really, really tiring, and we're not going to want to do it. Beth, I see you doing that right now, which I love. Right. I see this and I kind of get like this sickening feeling in my tummy. I'm like, this isn't okay. Well, this is the same piece of text. Same piece of text. Look at all these design tools, right? Spacing, color, headings, organizing information by category and how they relate to each other. Much better for our visual processing abilities, right? And so what is it telling us? We all have accessibility needs. I know we all get that here in this call. Society just happens to be designed and therefore accessible to those with typical visual processing abilities. People with CVI have a right to accessibility, something that many of us use every moment of every day, right? Rebecca Davis says this all the time. It's not extra, it's access.
I got that from Julie Durando from the National Deaf Blind Project. So we have.
Thank you. I knew you got it from somebody.
Yes, ma'am.
But you brought it to me. So thank you for sharing that. And so this is a quote from Julie Bascom, who's part of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. And this is from a book called Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau. Love this book. I love reading it as a parent to understand what ableism is, to understand the disability rights, history, and movement. I really highly recommend it. And I just love this quote about, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just, the reality is that people with developmental disabilities, including people with the most significant disabilities, they have rich and complex inner lives. And no matter how significant our disability is, we can and do learn, think, and feel, right? And so no matter how much support, even if we need lots of support, we always need to presume competence. And it's the idea that regardless of all these things, we are fully human with the same rights as everyone else. And with the right support, we can express ourselves, participate in our communities, and make our own decisions. And that's what I want for my son. And I know that's what we all want for our kids. And so when we talk about CVI, we have to start with holistic comprehensive assessment, right? The CVI visual behaviors, they overlap at any given time and situation. And we need that whole child assessment to looks at every possible angle to create a baseline of understanding of how CVI and other factors uniquely impact the individual. And of course, ongoing assessment is critical. And we have a whole getting started with CVI assessments page on CVI Now if you want to learn more. There's a growing suite of assessments. Children with CVI need to have a functional vision assessment to understand how they use their vision and what are the barriers to access to their learning in the curriculum and the learning environment. Dr. Roman CVI Range is a popular one. Dutton has a CVI inventory. There are others out there as well. Perkins is creating their new CVI protocol, which is a digital assessment tool. It's currently in development. But then there's also, once you get a baseline data around how they're using their vision functionally, then you need to know, well, what's the most accessible learning media materials, technology, and how you present it. So the learning media assessment is really important. It's a part of the comprehensive visual assessment protocol, right? So what sensory modalities are they using, right? Tactile, vision, auditory. My son is a dual media learner. He's learning both print and Braille, and it's been a game changer for his literacy journey. Matt has a really cool 2D image assessment to understand what 2D images are accessible. Is it photographs all the way down to black and white line drawings? The ECC, the expanded core curriculum, is a must for students with visual impairments. It really levels the playing field, gives them access to the core curriculum, but all the other learning opportunities outside of that core curriculum, and orientation mobility as well to ensure safe navigation around their community. And also I want to talk about systematic instruction. On CVI Now, we have a whole webinar from Marguerite Tabato, who's my colleague here in the CVI Center, and she runs assessment and learning intervention here at Perkins. And really looking at using all of the data from assessments, creating that present level performance, creating those smart IEP goals, and how does that inform lesson plan design, understanding the CVI considerations, knowing the reliable responses of the student, and then understanding how to collect that data, what reinforcement looks like. And so systematic instruction is really about that holistic instructional approach, right? It's more than just putting up a black trifold for our kid. It's more than just adding color here. How are we going to incorporate explicit and direct instruction so they really progress towards their goals? And so when we think about accessibility for learning activities, what is the learning goal, right? What skills are needed and what are the students' strengths, and what concepts need to be understood? These two are important because if our kids have missed a lot from incidental learning, there's skills that need to be directly and explicitly taught that may not need to be taught to their same age peers. And so what are those, right? How did we know that? We need to assess and evaluate. How can we incorporate experiential learning, right, to build memory and context? What are the CVI supports and adaptations for visual access? And what are the other multisensory approaches, tactile, auditory, kinesthetic, that are matched to the unique needs of the students, right? If vision is unreliable, and if vision is not reliable 24/7, but learning needs to continue, what are all the options and tools available so the student can always access their learning if vision is not there? And so when we think about our design tools, this list comes from working on a project with Matt Tejan, that TVI in Connecticut, and Nye D'Amato, the adult with CVI, and we're working on a book around CVI and academic accessibility. And we've created these categories for design tools for CVI, and it starts with autonomy, agency, and advocacy, as it should for all of our kids with disabilities. So what are the choices for access? How do we model permission and consent? How do we collect ongoing data? How do we scaffold those self-advocacy skills? They don't just come automatically for our kids, but how do we teach them and scaffold and create that self-awareness they need? Calendar systems really build agency. What are those total communication systems look like? Auditory, audiobooks, screen readers, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, verbal descriptions. You know, as a parent, I feel like a radio parent, just describing everything around me. And then even now with my son, he also has central auditory processing disorder. So I have to describe my feelings, right? Because he doesn't pick up on tone or pitch. So I have to say, I'm angry right now, right? Because he doesn't understand my angry voice. So that's been taking some learning, but you really become this radio parent. And also I need to learn to speak much more slowly. Kinesthetic is movement is a part of learning, right? And movement breaks, we hear from many families, help their kids reset. Tactile, around tangibles, those manipulative objects, Braille. And then of course, the visual design tools that we saw in those examples earlier, color, spacing, reducing clutter, those environmental supports, reducing noise, making sure light isn't distracting, incorporating visual breaks. And so let's look at some examples here. And so here is an objective for a third grader, you know, given various math tools, the student will combine 2 add-ins with sums to 10 in isolation within the context of a word problem, given 3 out of 5 opportunities. And so what does it look like when you put multiple design tools in place? Okay. And so we might start with a muffin tin with 2 different color manipulatives to understand a group of 2, group of 3, just to kind of get as a warm-up to get them going. And then you might switch to a visual task around looking at groups of 2 and 3. Color coding is intentional, and you can do a lot around this. And then you might go back to that tactile to give that vision a break and work on, again, counting and adding and all of that. You can tell I'm not quite a math teacher. And then you might go back to visual, and this is where you see the equation. This is a magna board with 3D foam letters where you start, you know, looking at the equation, talking about the symbols. But then this might still be a lot. And so you might move to some type of movement break, maybe go around the classroom and find 3 of something or 2 of something. And then you come back and you bring it all together, bringing in the visual and the tactile. Just one example of different ways to switch different modalities and senses to make sure you keep that visual fatigue at bay and it doesn't come in. This is an example from Matt Teachin, his student in high school, an example for choice for access. So, you know, he asks, you know, for a certain activity, would you prefer to type or dictate or write? You know, would you like my divider up or divider down? Again, scaffolding these self-advocacy skills, but also incorporating choice for access. Calendar systems are a really strong way for our kids to build that agency, but also to have that context and memory and predictability in the day. So, you know, they can have some type of agency and comfort and anchoring to get through the day when they don't have access to those visual cues that help them know what's coming next. Here's Henry with his tactile schedule at school. He loves his tactile schedule. Here, as an example of one at home. Time is really hard for him to understand, so we try to use the timer. We're working on it. Another example from a parent, here's an object calendar. It looks like it's food here and then get changed. Here's a First Then app that another parent gave an example for. And another parent, his example of a visual schedule, pretty simplified, 3 things, incorporating that number 12 to start connecting it with numbers and time. So just some examples of how to really help anchor our kids, give them agency. And again, calendar systems are a really great way to build in math and literacy. CVI has a lot of implications when it comes to communication and building a total communication approach. And we have a lot of information on CVI now about this. We have an incredible speech language therapist here at Perkins, and she's gonna build some more information about how to really consider the CVI visual behaviors when it comes to building a total communication approach for a child. But there's so many questions, and we have some resources about it, but it really requires so much collaboration between the TVI and the speech language therapist, lots of trial and error, lots of data, and there's not one size fits all. Of course not. There's kids with CVI who use eye gaze, who use auditory scanning, who use motor control. So you just got to know the kid in front of you. CVI and literacy is another big piece. We have a lot of resources here, and you'll get a PDF of this so you can click through and just explore more. But I want to give some examples here. Here's Henry using a smart brailler. And this is just an example of how in literacy, he used multiple means to, you know, access his learning. So he felt for magnetic letters, he matched them to written letters on the board and then brailled them. Here's an example of his adapted books. Like I said, he loves riding the train. We ride it Saturday and Sunday. I've gone to every single MBTA stop, but it's his love, and it's actually been his gateway to literacy and learning. So you never know what's gonna open up learning for our kids. And so here we have a real photograph, right? And then there's a tactile. For him, he really is able to use his vision when he's always touching something, right? When he gets a tactile warm up, it helps his vision come online a little more. And when he's using his vision, he needs to hold something. But another kid with CVI, if they're touching something, they might not be able to use their vision. Again, you got to know the whole child, but this is what works for him. And then his print, which is accessible in blue and 60-point font, and there's also Braille on the bottom of the page. And so no matter what's going on with his vision, he has an access point into his literacy. Another example, he wrote a little story about going on the red line, and then as they read it out loud, he was able to tactilely go through different parts of the story. So for example, a Porter Squirrel will make him want ice cream, and so he touches the ice cream symbol. Another way to really connect all of his sensory systems to really help that robust learning. And this is from his TVI, Tammy Reisman. Some more examples of literacy in action. An alphabet book with the actual photograph, but also the actual objects. And then another example of dual literacy. Here's Grace again. And there's a whole, her mom wrote a great article about Grace and her celebration of reading. And like she said, it's hard. It's really fatiguing to read print. Her mom says she knows the rules of language. She can decode words. She has access to print materials. She uses CCTV to read, which magnifies it. It's right here, to read materials that have not been modified. But then she's also trained herself to listen to books at faster and faster pace. And she can now consume books at 525 words per minute, which is really fast. I can't understand it when I read it like that. So, our kids have strategies for everything, and it's really about knowing what access works for them. So some examples of some visual tools. The iPad is a really good friend for a lot of our kids with CVI. It's a great low vision tool. And so again, what this does here, here's one of those worksheets that are just like, why do we have all these things on here? But we do. But like prioritize the learning goal. The learning goal is about spelling these CVC words. It's not about cutting. And for this child, that motor skill of cutting was really hard. And where do you want them to spend their energy, right? Not on cutting. So how can you adapt this task to make sure it really prioritizes the learning goal? Removes visual clutter, adds spacing. There's intentional use of color here, using realistic images and accessible font. It's digital. You have that backlighting and it's presented in an accessible field. An example of how to modify worksheets. We have more examples in our adapting worksheets for CVI article on CVI Now. Another example here of the use of the iPad, use of color, reducing clutter. Again, it's a really strong tool. Here's a student with CVI who used an AAC device, and he uses AAC device as a keyboard to attach to, I think this is a Boom Card app, to incorporate in his learning. CVI in math, it's a big one. Math is tough for a lot of our kids with CVI. And again, Matt Tejan, the TVI in Connecticut, is leading the way around looking at the research around math and research around CVI and trying to think about, what's going on there. But some examples here, it's hard with clutter to do that one-to-one counting, but if you organize it, if you color code it, that helps that one-to-one counting a little more. Again, taking that worksheet, this cluttered worksheet for adding numbers and making it, and this is a non-technical way, but putting it on, I think this is an all-in-one board, and, putting on bigger font, having some tactile manipulatives for the symbols, having that blue box here to know where they put the sum. This is again from Matt Tejan, something about, geometry, so, but making it tactile, making it a real model, help them answer this question, right? Those visual spatial skills, a lot of visual skills here. For Henry, he does this a lot. He asks his friends in his class what they're having for lunch, and then he graphs it. So this is an example of, math in action that's very multisensory. And here's some more examples of, here's a girl, she's doing snack math, so she's counting bites, but then connecting that to numbers and using some manipulatives as well. And again, reducing that clutter, putting up in the most appropriate visual field. Here's a middle school student who had a lot of trouble with timelines, right? Not being able to visualize was really tough. And a lot of us visualize the number line. That really helps us solve lots of math problems. And this is actually a timeline, of AD and BC, and creating a tactile timeline really helped anchor and understand how long ago the Roman Empire was, for example. And social access is a big one for CVI. We have a great article about how to rethink for social environmental norms, right? Looking and listening is really hard for kids with CVI. And so you need to not expect that, and you need to also accommodate it. Sitting still might also be hard. Many of our kids might need movement to create a better sense of seeing. Group work and peer collaboration is tough. And those over-decorated classrooms, there's been research that even any kid, it's tough to learn an over-decorated classroom as well. So lots of examples and ideas of how to accommodate and put supports in. And then we have a lot about, a new article about CVI and central auditory processing disorder. It's like the CVI in the hearing world. It's a brain-based processing disorder. So they hear, but what they hear is not meaningful. And about other things, O&M and adaptive PE. Again, I'm just putting these here just to know that they're there as resources for you. And so in the little bit of time we have left, I just want to highlight a few things from the CVI Now IEP guide. It's a productive, solutions-oriented resource, right? This is one of the hardest things we have to do as parents is now we have to create this whole set of skills to advocate for our kid in the school. And it's really, really hard. And we created this whole IEP guide to really go through each of the pieces of the IEP and bring in CVI considerations. And so some takeaways. Assessment drives the IEP. This is something I wish I really knew when my son was in kindergarten. We were down in another state, and he didn't have the comprehensive assessments he needed. And without them, it was awful. It was a really hard year for him. His behaviors are off the wall. And nobody really knew what to do because we didn't have any assessment data. And this is what I wish I harped on. And so it's really important that it's what drives everything. Because that creates present levels, that creates goals and objectives, that informs services and placements, accommodations, and then systematic instruction can be built off of that, right? Anecdotes without data are meaningless. And of course, we all know parent collaboration is critical. We're here at the Federation. And it's also about access to learning, right? That's what it is with our kids, right? The guiding light should be, how do I make this curriculum accessible? And then it's so hard to be collaborative when it's about your kid, right? But how do we come with the assumption that they just need more information about my kid and how to serve them? And how to figure out your priorities and zone in the most important ones, right? Now that my kid is 10, it's like, okay, like we need to really start thinking about where do we want him to be when he's 25? And what is his priorities to lead up to that? And I've learned that I don't want to be the one in the IEP meeting talking the most. I need to be asking targeted questions, and I want all of his team to be sharing their information. I like this quote from Monica Jones, a CVI parent and also the founder of the Brain Recovery Project. She says, parents have to think about, what do I really need? What are our trade-offs? Focus on the things that are important to you and try to get the team on board with that and aim for collaboration. Again, a whole new set of skills that we never signed up for as parents. So I get that. And hopefully the IEP guide can help you through that. And then I also just want to share that there's so much that comes with being a disability parent, and we see that, and we talk about a lot of the hard stuff on CVI now. If you don't follow Amanda Griffith-Atkins on Instagram, if you're on Instagram, she has an incredible community there. And we also have a conversation with her, and I'm inviting her back as well to talk to the CVI Now group. And I just want to end with, give yourself permission to be your child's parent. This is something I've learned and continue to learn, right? Do what brings your family joy. And learning and growth happens in these fun moments, share those hard truths. It's hard. We experience trauma a lot. We experience grief a lot. And tell yourself that you're enough, because you are, and carve out time for you. So I'm going to stop there. Please, we have a CVI Now parent Facebook group. If you want to join, you're welcome as parents. And thank you so much for your time. Are there any questions? I know we just have a few minutes left. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a lot to take in a very short period of time. Does Perkins have a list of recommended apps or tools that one can use for a child with CVI?
Yeah, and the adapting worksheets article, we have a list as well. And that's also a fun question to ask in the CVI Now parent group as well, just because, parents have tried out others, but we have a list of those, especially for educationally, yeah.
We have a parent whose school terminated their daughter's visual services because they couldn't find a clinician. Do you have any recommendations of where she could find a clinician for what she needs?
To diagnose CVI?
I don't know if you need to diagnose. I think it's Mariah. Is that how you pronounce your name? This was your question. Are you still here?
She's diagnosed already, Mariah says. I mean,
So when you're saying a clinician, are you talking about a teacher or a,
the
what do you
TVI.
mean by clinician? She has CVI.
Do they not have a TVI? There's a massive TVI shortage.
So there's a clinician specifically for CVI. And so I guess she's needing one for her team. They couldn't find someone.
They couldn't find a teacher with visually impaired to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's the staffing shortage is really hard, but they have diagnosed the CVI, and the IEP, states the need for vision services. I mean, you and the Federation would know this better than I do, but I don't think they can terminate because of staffing shortages.
So this
Right.
is sorry.
Go
this
ahead,
is
Rebecca.
So I'm a parent. My kid is 16, and we've been doing this, like Rachel said, and we learned so much. Rachel, thank you. It's fantastic.
You're
But
fantastic.
if you are parents and you're here, this is the problem, guys. There is a shortage of staff. There's a shortage of doctors who will diagnose it. There's a shortage of people diagnosed because they don't know what to do about it. But they've known about CVI for up to 30 plus years now. And we have to figure out a way to make systemic change. Nobody can tell you, I don't have a TVI, so I can't give your kids services. They can't do that, Mariah. They just can't. So maybe you reach out to us here at the Federation, and we figure out how to walk you through what to say to them. Because this kind of advocacy is so, we have to. We hear this all the time, and we've all lived it, and it's just it drives me crazy that parents are still having to fight these
Yeah.
issues. So please reach out and let's see what
Yeah.
we can,
Reach out to,
Give you.
to the school. We're just, yeah, okay.
or to the Federation, and let us see if we can
Oh.
walk you through, what you can say to them when you go back to your IEP meeting and say, this is the law. If she has a diagnosis of visual of impairment, she deserves access to a teacher of the visually impaired. It's
Right.
just
I
law.
also wanted to add, just in terms of advocacy, if I could, it's Melanie. Preventblindness.org, which is a Massachusetts-based organization, is doing advocacy work around vision and vision screenings and vision awareness in schools and what have you. And so they had a bill that they proposed last January that got to the Ways and Means Committee, but did not get to the floor. And, if you reach out to Mass Family Voices
Okay,
at the Federation, I'm happy to share that.
okay, thank
So,
you. Mhm.
Mariah, in the chat, Pam
Yeah.
knows a number so that you can call the Federation directly, and someone on
Nice.
the team will find a way to help you.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Mhm.
Unfortunately,
Thank
we
you.
are beyond the hour, and so there was so much information that you packed into that period of time. We're not
I
going to be
gotta
able
get it all.
to address any questions right now, but we do have all of the questions that are in the chat. We will, so Rachel will answer those questions for us, and we will post them along with the recording of tonight's presentation for you. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and Rachel for sharing so much robust information for us to all kind of chew on. I was thinking about some of the things that you were saying, and I remember my son sometimes would pretend that he was asleep, and I interpreted that as a teenager who didn't want to do math. And I'm not totally convinced that that wasn't always the case.
Mhm.
But I also know that when they said that he had CVI-like symptoms, it makes me wonder if sometimes he was closing his eyes because of the visual clutter. Like it does make me wonder now with some
Sure.
of this fatigue. And then the other thing that was striking to me was that we're basically talking about the complex learner, our kids, so many of our kids
Exactly.
have multiple systems that they're challenged with. My son was nonverbal, non-ambulatory, and hearing impaired and had CVI-like symptoms. That's exhausting for a child to learn in. So these are the kinds of students that we're talking about here, that level of complexity for them to live every day and to learn. So you've given us much to chew on tonight. We look forward to more discussions like this in the coming new year. And of course, all of you know that the Visions of Community Conference is coming up in, is it March of next year, Pam?
March 4th, please mark
Okay.
your calendar.
Okay, yes. So we can get the transcript, yes, of the lecture, Helen. We will work on that for you. We will also upload the video recording of this so people have access to it, as well as the PowerPoint, which has is chock full of lots of hyperlinks for you to access.
I'll send a PDF of that. Yes.
And then, as I said, the questions that were sent in the chat, we'll also make sure we address those as well. So with all of that, that was just such a mouthful. I'm a little overwhelmed with all the information that we just saw, but so thankful to have access to that. And just a reminder to everyone, if you're ever struggling to try to figure out how to access these kinds of services or other services for that matter, and you need a partner to brainstorm with you and to help you to know how to attack the problem, please remember to call us here at the Federation. We're always here to serve you.
So grateful for you all.
Yes. All right. Well, with that, have a wonderful evening. And we will not be having another session in December. So I wish you all a wonderful holiday celebration in whatever form that takes for you, and look forward to an amazing new year filled with growth and happiness and peace and success. Take care of yourselves, folks. Know that you're appreciated. And if no one told you, you're doing an amazing job taking care of your child or children.
Absolutely. And Beth, if I can add, we do tomorrow night, we have the third in a series of 6 listening sessions that the Federation is sponsoring with DESE this fall and winter to gather feedback from families on Massachusetts special education indicators. There's one on, there's one tomorrow, there's another one Monday, and another one a little later in the month. So please look for those, and we hope that you join us for those as well. Thank you all again for being here. Rachel, I learned so much.
I'm so
Thank
glad.
you so
Thanks
much.
for having me.
And I want to encourage everyone to fill out the link to the survey. We use the information to really plan our programs better.
Yeah.
All right.